One, don't prepare students for something, prepare them for anything. We just don't know what that something is anymore.
You're listening to the NAESP Principal Podcast, where school leaders connect around real challenges, real experiences, and real growth. In today's episode, prepare them for anything, innovation, disruption, and the small shifts that matter. Liz Garden and Scott McLeod from NAESP's Center for Innovative Leadership talk with Eric Sheninger about what innovation really means in schools and how leaders can challenge conventional thinking without simply adding more to anyone's plate. From purposeful technology use to deeper learning, calculated risks, and small shifts in practice, this conversation explores how principals can help schools move beyond buzzwords and focus on what actually improves learning. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the NAESP Principal Podcast. I am Liz Garden, proud principal of Clough Elementary School in Mendon, Mass, and also a co-fellow for the Center for Innovative Leadership. And I am joined with my good buddy, who I'm going to let introduce himself.
Hey, everybody. Scott McLeod, professor of educational leadership at the University of Colorado, Denver, and also the founding director of a university center called Castle, which is the first university center focused on leadership and innovation, technology, deeper learning, all the fun stuff, as I like to say. We're delighted to have with us today my good friend, Eric Sheninger. And Eric brings to us a rich tapestry of experience. And so, Eric, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to our audience. Some of them will know your work already. So,
rich tapestry can only go downhill from here. My name's Eric, and I'm former principal from New Jersey. We did a lot of amazing things. I get to do what I do because of my teachers. And now I'm the CEO of Aspire Change EDU, which is a collaborative consultancy, which really focuses on research and evidence to help schools and districts fundamentally improve teaching, learning, and leadership.
Nice. Eric and I go way back when Eric was first thinking about going one-to-one in his school in New Jersey and giving his kids devices. He came out to Iowa and visited schools with me for a couple of days. That was a blast.
Oh, you don't know how much of a blast that was, because when I was on the plane, we had a little issue where a note about something that was not good was pushed under the bleachers. Oh. And it was like, oh my goodness, what was breaking loose. Oh yeah, so it was memorable, Scott. Not just the learning experience, but the stress I had on that flight from New Jersey to Iowa.
Got it.
Well, we've come a long way from there, hopefully.
Absolutely. Eric, you've been known as an envelope pusher from early on. So we're delighted to talk to you a little bit about innovation. Tell folks a little bit about your current work. What are you helping schools with?
Yeah, I think the main thing is, how do we challenge conventional thinking without adding more to anyone's plate? Nobody wants another thing to do. They don't want a fad. They want to really stretch the limited resources they have. And I kind of try to break it down into this. When we think about the biggest barrier, in my opinion, or what I hear from teachers and administrators, is time. And, it's hard to grant more time, but what I try to do is help people think about how they could use the time they have more effectively. So from a teacher perspective, how do school leaders help teachers maximize the time they have with their students? And from a leadership perspective, how do we ensure that our time is not really dedicated to managerial tasks, but really looking at not just moving the needle from instruction, which is what the teacher does, but how do we ensure the pedagogical shifts are occurring where the emphasis is on learning in the classroom and administrators are providing timely, practical, specific feedback. And the research shows timely, practical, specific. And I'm fortunate enough to visit thousands of classrooms every year and kind of still be a practitioner in a sense. But yeah, that's the short version, added on, challenging, the things like best practice. I don't feel there is a best practice. If there was, we'd all be doing it with a high degree of fidelity and getting amazing results. There are effective practices. There's also not one right way or best way to do things. The most effective way is how leaders lead their people to move the needle in positive ways.
So, Eric, Liz and I are fellows for this center, which is really sort of supposed to represent the leading edge of, leadership innovation in elementary and middle schools. And I think, we often assume that folks have a common definition of the word innovation and what innovation means. Wonder if you would talk to us for just a minute about how do you think about that concept of innovation, and in particular, how is it more than just tweaking current practice?
I love that question because, a lot of times innovation is synonymous with technology. Yep. And that's not innovation. You can go into a classroom, see every kid on a device, no talking, no discourse, no real thinking, no deeper learning, which is something that, Scott, you are really a proponent of. And I think when we look at innovation, yes, it could be new, it could be different, but does it lead to a better result? So, for example, innovation to a teacher could be consistently implementing closure at the end of a lesson in form of an exit ticket. That could be a new or different practice based on the consistent part. Innovation could be a school leader who really is working to create a learning walk process that is aligned to the latest research, but that really, really provides those touch points that are giving teachers valuable insights into their practice. So new, better, but does it lead to a result?
So, Eric, I think that's an interesting response. And I remember when you came out and visited schools in Iowa with me, we would walk out of some of those places and be like, they're just doing digital worksheets, right? Like they've had laptops for years, and their innovation is that they've moved worksheets from paper to digital, right? And so what you just talked about is this idea that innovation might be viewed through an individual's lens, but that may not necessarily change how we do school, right? Like if just because we have a new learning walkthrough system, for example, doesn't necessarily mean that we have changed how we do learning, teaching, schooling, et cetera, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. When we did our learning walk protocols, we did it 100 a week, 400 a month. And that's something that I committed my team to. However, that translated us to changing how we facilitated our faculty meetings and moved away from just going through an agenda, which is, again, I was guilty of that. I was guilty of everything that I kind of rail against now. But then we really focused on unpacking the results of the learning walks, talking about the trends, and really emphasizing the glows and the grows. And it really became a more 45 minutes of how do we improve learning? So that when I think about that definition of innovation, it was a new process. It was different, but it actually led to a result that gave our teachers insights, because it's hard to give every teacher feedback. It's really, really hard. But if they know that we're in classrooms, we're being transparent, here's our focus, and here's how we're going to present that to help them grow. So yeah, but again, innovation to one principal is going to look different than another principal. And that's the beauty of it. But is it aligned to research? Is there evidence? Are we able to show efficacy and just move away from the buzzword?
So we've had a chance to talk to a lot of different principals across the country who are, I would say, they are trying to implement innovative leadership. And you just said that you like that you get a chance now to go into lots of different schools. What are you seeing as innovative leadership happening? I know you just gave a very specific example about what the walkthrough is, and that's great. But what else are you seeing out there for innovative leadership? Because I think, as Scott said too, we find that principals individually, they have a hard time wrapping their head around what does innovation mean. And then also sometimes they're in isolation within their own district, right? So I'm hoping that in order for change to really happen, it has to be bigger than just individual principals. But I'm just curious what you're seeing when you're going into different schools. What kinds of innovative leadership are you seeing in action?
Yeah, I'm fortunate to see a lot of really effective practices. And, one specific district, Katy ISD in near where I live in Houston, They just went 1-to-1 this past year, and they learned lessons from watching everyone else. They didn't want to just throw out devices. They wanted to truly be very systematic in their implementation. So,
what did they do during the pandemic?
It's a great question.
Okay.
So when
follow up with that,
the one thing that they really focused on was the self-graded exit tickets, and you saw it K-12, and it was really awesome watching. I mean, simple shift, but so powerful. Scaffolded questions aligned to the standards, which in Texas are called TEKS, and students able to see, whether or not their progress towards the learning target, but then the teachers getting valuable feedback as to whether what they planned was actually effective. And I equate that to purposeful use of technology. I focus on not data-driven teaching and learning, but data-enhanced teaching and learning, because we want data to enhance the process, because if it drives it, it takes out the personal approach, which is so critical to learning. The other day, I co-presented with an innovative principal, 6 through 9 principal from Utah, Nikki Slaw. And I couldn't believe what her school did. They got rid of grades, no points, no homework. And it's a truly personalized campus where the teachers are not in the front of the room. They are using data to enhance station rotations, choice boards, but their achievement has also been above other middle schools in the area. And when you walk in that school, it's just a different feeling. And students can progress not by seat time, but by competency. So you could have a 7th grader that is 7th grade, but is actually doing 9th grade math. So those are two glowing examples. What I also see is a lot of principals kind of getting some validation of what they're doing, but then taking to the next level. For example, station rotation. Not new, but is the data being used to group, regroup, differentiate, target instruction? Then afterwards, is there some type of wrap up that goes back to the learning objective? How do we take that model, modify it, and then implement it at the middle level? So a lot of amazing things, but it really, what all the schools that I see share, they share one thing. It's the small shifts to practice done consistently that lead to the most effective and consistent results.
Eric, you're a interesting dichotomy because you spend a lot of time working on instructional coaching and sort of like helping people better make small shifts that we know work in existing practice, but you also have this disruptive side to you. So, I'm thinking about your conversation around personalized learning. Like you have at least one book focused on personalization of learning. You also have at least one book focused on disrupting and blowing up school, right? Kind of. And so sometimes I think those are in tension. So for example, there's been a long standing argument about what do we mean by personalized learning? And there's the folks who say personalized learning is just digitizing the curriculum into small chunks and have kids navigate through curricular content at their own path and pace. And that's one definition of personalized learning, right? And in that model, blended learning structures like station rotations, choice boards, playlists, flipped teaching models, whatever, right, fit very neatly into giving kids agency in terms of pathway and pace, but don't really necessarily put the ownership or the direction of learning in terms of connecting to kids' interests or passions, right? Which is sort of the other end of the polar argument where people are saying that's personalized learning means making it personal to the kids. And now we're talking about things like genius hours and inquiry projects and passion projects and, place-based experiences and that kind of stuff, right? And so you sort of seem to navigate those tensions. So talk to us a little bit about how you think about those two ends of the spectrum and where you're trying to live in between them.
Oh, there's so much I want to say.
Good. You got time.
And, I always try to say these are my opinions, but the one thing that I really feel holds us back is our perception of definitions. And I'm going to tackle both disruptive thinking and personalization and think about, because the challenge is how do you create a definition that resonates with the majority? And that's hard. Like we could talk about a word such as rigor. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely.
And I get it. I don't like the word, but what does rigor mean? It means how do we get students to think? How do we get them to dive deeper into the learning process? So, I want to first start about personalization is not. It's not about all students doing the same thing at the same time, the same way. That's an impersonal approach. It's also not about putting every kid on a device, having them use an adaptive tool, which I could list all the names right now. That's not personalization. Personalization is all students getting what they need, when and where they need it to learn. Now, when you think about that definition, that ties into data enhanced processes. It ties into personal interests, passions, interests. It relates to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So when we think about personalization, we get so focused on high agency practices, voice, choice, path, pace, place. But we need to make sure that we are cognizant of how we're getting our learners to think. How are we getting them to apply their thinking in relevant and meaningful ways? How do they look at a assessment and understand the value of that? Now,
and then reflect on it and then make new goals and things like that.
Exactly. And, John Dewey said, we don't learn from experience. We learn when we reflect on experience. Now, disruption, oh my goodness. I mean, we could talk about the pandemic, but now, if I ask you what's the most disruptive force right now, what are you going to say?
I mean, it's probably AI.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
AI,
right.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of disruptive forces. Let's sort of preface that education.
Yeah.
And again, we saw the pandemic. I remember how disruptive the BlackBerry was to me in 2005 when I got on it. It changed everything. But in this world where disruption is the norm, we have to look again at the culture of our district schools and classrooms. Disruptive thinking is the ability of students to replace conventional ideas with innovative solutions to authentic problems. Again, it connects to personalization. It connects to deeper learning, but it also connects to things like Bloom's taxonomy, DOK, relevant application, PBL. But if we don't start moving beyond the definition and really think about how our culture reflects what our students need, our students don't necessarily need to be skilled. They need to be competent. And competencies take in skills, knowledge, but also behavior, the two, perseverance. So if we don't, I'm not going to say if we don't change school, but if we don't really take that critical lens to our structures and ask ourselves, when students, are we meeting their needs? And when they leave our classrooms, they go from elementary to middle to high school to college, will they truly be ready for a world that is impossible to predict?
Yeah. And I think about, I love the thought of we have to go beyond the definitions. And I think about all of the teachers that are in my building, all of the educators that we didn't go to school and we weren't taught the way that we'd expect and we need them to be teaching and learning with their kids. And so like this is the challenge of how do you not just disrupt, but you have to we have to help people unlearn how we work.
It's challenging conventional wisdom. We are so impacted by experience.
Mm-hmm.
We often teach the way we were taught.
Mm-hmm.
We lead the way we were led. Mm-hmm. And it's
sometimes, or there are leaders out there that are also disruptive leaders that don't want to lead the way they were led.
I kind of look at it as conditioning, like Pavlov's dogs. So, we got to do that direct instruction. We got to talk to the kids. We got to, make sure they behave. We got to make sure they're at class on time. We got to have those bells. Oh my goodness. I don't know about you, but the only time I hear bells is when I'm in a school. Mm-hmm. So and I think we have isolated pockets of excellence, but if we truly want to disrupt the system, not do more work, but do the right work. And I think that sometimes it's hard for people to wrap around is, what is the right work? And I kind of lead with 3 questions, kind of using Simon Sinek's golden circle. Why do you do things the way you do them? How much you do it better? And what tells you if you're actually successful? Mm-hmm. We can kind of always articulate the why, but the how and the what is where there's typically opportunities for growth.
Good principals help others learn and grow, but great principals know how to learn and grow themselves, too. Professional growth is essential for educators. Hear from Pennsylvania principal and NAESP member Matt Moyer as he shares one of the many ways he's grown as a school leader.
One of the areas that I continue to work on and try to improve is in post-observation conference meetings with teachers. So, as I have grown and got to know people and learn from them, that is one area that I try to get better and better with my questioning to them and allowing the opportunity for the teachers to be able to show me how they can grow rather than being a model where I just give them my feedback. It has turned to where they are giving their own feedback and their own ideas and their own suggestions. And I find out how I can support them in what they want to do or the areas they want to grow. And that has been something that I've learned through my work with a variety of people with NAESP.
Whether it's strategies to support teachers, students, or yourself, you can find more ways to learn and grow by visiting naesp.org.
I was in a wonderful session yesterday that was talking about cognitive complexity and how do we elevate students' questioning and critical thinking. And one of the slides that she put on the screen was a quote from Goethe, the German philosopher, who said, "The things that matter most should not be at the mercy of things that matter least." And I love that quote because I think, we're all navigating educational reform circles and sometimes district mandates or state mandates where they seem to sometimes place emphasis on things that matter less at the expense of things that matter more.
It's a great point. It's how do our actions prioritize learning? And I think that's so, it's almost so hard for us to wrap our heads around because we get so caught up in the minutia. And I typically show a slide in my keynotes where people tend to focus on things they cannot control. And we need people to focus on what they can control. They can control their own actions. They can't control other people, but people can say that there's micromanagers, but even those that might micromanage are still not as connected, in the day-to-day actions. And that's where, school leaders, their role is so important. Not only what they do, but how do they build capacity? And we can talk about innovation, personalization, deeper learning, disruptive thinking. But here's what teachers tell me. They're like, Eric, we need to know, how do we do it? And what can it look like? And that falls on the shoulders of the leaders. And that really comes back to, if you're not getting into classrooms, if you're not collecting evidence, if you're not moving from PD, something that's done to us, to professional learning, something that people want to do, if, learning isn't job embedded, ongoing, if it's not laden with feedback, if we're not collecting evidence, that's what people want to see. And the evidence is, like from a teacher's point, here's what it could look like. How can you make it better? And one thing I try to do with my coaching is have systems create their own artifact libraries, so they can own the work, so they can bask in their glory. So then the school leaders have this repository of saying, hey, here's a great example of deeper learning in third grade. Here's a great example of personalization at the secondary level. And it's that evidence. And we're so trained to tell people what we do. And if each of you tell me what you're doing, I'm going to look at you, I'm going to smile, and then I'm going to say, that's awesome. Can you please show me what it looks like so that I can use this with my other systems so people don't have to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, so true. I'm nodding along going because that idea of an artifact library or a, collection of deeper learning video clips or something, because people need to, so many educators are willing and want to take risks and try different things. There is still that, I feel like I find that educators have, it's like they feel like they have to ask permission. Every school I'm in, I feel like I wish that they didn't have that, but it's just sort of like they're trained to feel like, well, I've got to make sure this is okay.
Oh, man, I got to comment on that. So I can't count how many times I got slapped on the wrist when I was a principal because I never asked for permission. I asked for forgiveness
Forgiveness
later.
after, yep.
And here's the thing. We have these mental blocks that we think something's going to happen. But here's a reality. We do not get rid of ineffective teachers and administrators in our country. So what are people truly afraid of? And I think that comes back to our level of comfort and fear. And if we are not able to get out of the comfort zone or the fear zone, it's hard to learn and grow. So, and I think it's about calculated risks. That's the whole point, because you want that calculated risk because, again, you know what? There is a lot of things that we worry about that could go wrong legitimately, but no risk, no reward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about this year in my school, we tried something different. We said, let's blow up the schedule. It's an elementary school. The schedule had always been done one way. And, I pulled some teachers together and said, we don't have to do it like this. And they were, nervous. They were like, well, but that's all we know. But we went back to say, well, why do, we're not just blowing up the schedule to blow up the schedule, right? We're doing it because we want to do better for our kids. And we filled up a whiteboard of here's all the things that we want to have happen in our school, but the schedule is holding us back. So if we get rid of that, try something different. And what was awesome was to see teachers, once they kind of, okay, it's going to be okay. It might not work. It might mess up, to see them come up with all kinds of ideas. I didn't do it, as the building leader. They came up with the ideas. We changed our schedule. We went 2 or 3 months into the school year. There was a problem with the schedule, and they came back around the table and said, well, we changed it once, let's change it again, because it worked a little bit, but not quite. And, I was to see that happen. But that's, again, it took a lot to get them to be comfortable with taking that risk and not doing what we've always done, but always going back to the fact that, we're not going to, all these other things that we want to change learning. We want to, have better, deeper learning experiences. We want to have more time for kids to have, as you say, effective practices happening in the classroom. Well, the schedule is limiting us. So that's sort of an easy change, but people they kind of skip that. We talk about the practices in the classroom, but we're confined to the schedule, for example. So that was exciting to see, but it took a lot of convincing teachers that it's okay. It might make a mistake. And the fact that we were able to come together and change it again mid-year, to change a schedule, that's not an easy thing to do, but it went smoothly because, the teachers were leading it.
I'm always interested in sort of the power of historical inertia and the phenomena of retraction. So, in schools, it always sometimes seems like it's 2 steps forwards, 1.99 steps back. And I love that you're talking about the schedule, Liz, because it reminds me of this school that I was working with in Iowa, where the middle school principal said, my teachers have been coming to me for the last couple of years and saying that we're trying to do these deeper, richer learning experiences with students, and our schedule, which is broken up into 45-minute blocks or whatever, just doesn't allow
Probably
for that.
47-minute blocks.
Yeah, 47-minute blocks, right? Because as soon as we start to get into something, we have to, send people off. And so he and a team did some really good sort of rethinking work. And the next year presented his 6 middle school teams with this revised schedule in which they had these massive blocks of time that were multiple hours. Right. And then even though they had been coming to him and saying that they wanted these longer blocks of time, 5 of the 6 teams immediately broke it back up into 47-minute chunks. And I think we see that a lot in education, as that even when we have the ability to think about and even create structures, that historical inertia pulls us back. So Eric, talk to us a little bit about how do you help schools avoid the phenomena of retraction, right?
Yeah.
And sort of pulling back towards what we think school should look like.
And I think that kind of, as I listen to both of you, comfort is the enemy of progress. And when we think about retraction, here's the thing that, we hear a lot is the testament to effective leadership is when that leader leaves, does the culture that was collectively built stay in place? And I think for leaders, they have to, not ask others to do what they're not willing to do themselves. They have to model. They have to be learning side by side with their teachers. If you're asking your staff to do PLCs, what does your administrator PLC look like? And don't even get me started on PLCs, because the majority are glorified common planning and not actually looking at data, evidence, or student work. And I think that really takes that commitment from the leader, because here's the thing. If your people don't believe that you are sincere, if they don't see that the words align with your actions, they're going to start thinking, why should I do this? But I also think there has to be some bold tenacity aligned to it. Is, when a district mandate does come forth, how do we kind of, bake that in a way that's not going to derail progress? So, and I see that a lot. I'm seeing school systems, go back to explicit instruction. They are moving away from devices, which again, I don't want to see kids on devices all the time. It's going back to, we hear the basics. Yeah. There are more textbook purchases. Okay. Now, again, I'm not saying those are inherently bad, but we do know, based on, research, is if students exhibit cognitive overload, too much talking at them, they are going to tune out. If it's not relevant, meaningful, applicable, they're still going to go home and probably be glued on a device. So I think, and I don't know if balance is the right word, but from a leader perspective, how do you work to sustain change? How do you work to continually validate progress and efforts of your people? How do you try to shield your people from things that you might not believe in? I mean, that was a lot of my role as a principal. I had to shield my staff. And I said, hey, I'm going to take the hits here. You need to keep continuing doing what you are doing because we believe in it. Well, 95% believed in it. There's always going to be the 5% that give you 95% of the challenges. But we did that successfully. And I think going back to effective schools, the schools that maintain the focus, they are the ones that stay committed to the processes that were creating a new normal, as you mentioned before. And I think if you create a new normal, it's hard to go back to old. But if people don't see the value in the new normal, I am also not a fan of the term buy-in. We shouldn't have to sell people on better ways to do things. Dan Pink taught me that through Drive. If we want people to truly embrace change, not for the sake of change, but to embrace different, better, they need to see the value in it.
I've got one more if we have time. So Eric, one of the reasons I like you so much is that, like me, you work with both administrators and teachers, right? And I think you come to that work with a very strong coaching and capacity building lens. So I want you to talk for just a minute about, let's say that you're working with a new school or district. What approaches are you taking with teachers as you work with them for the first time, and what mindsets are you bringing to that work? And then similarly, what approaches are you taking with leaders, and what mindsets are you bringing to that work with them?
I ask lots of questions. I never want to assume, because I hear a lot of that. I in the circuit, you hear a lot of ideas. Do this, don't do that. And from the perspective of teachers and administrators, they don't want to hear that. So it's asking questions such as, where do you want to go? How are you going to get there? How will you measure success? How will you identify whether you were successful? From a teacher perspective, it's kind of helping them identify where they're on their spectrum. And I use I created a cycle of continuous improvement, and we kind of work through, some educators need help planning lessons that are aligned to standards with measurable goals. Some need help with effective strategies. Some need to determine and evaluate whether what they did was successful. And then the growth piece, it's the same thing for leaders, is how are you developing your action plans? How are you planning your professional learning? How are you planning your faculty meetings? How are you planning your walkthrough processes? What strategies will you use to move from vision and action to results? How will you evaluate whether you were successful from a qualitative and quantitative standpoint? And then how will you work to grow individually, but with your people? So, Nikki Slaw and I, when we wrote Personalized, one of the things that we kind of emphasized was when it comes to learning, there's not one right way. Same thing with leadership. There is not a best way or right way to lead, whether you're in a classroom, a school, or a district. So the questions lead people to their own sort of identification of what they do well, but the best part is they identify where they need to grow. And that alignment to current focus, current initiatives, current expenditures, but also that vulnerability. Here's where, and I'll tell you right now, the biggest vulnerability I see comes from data. We have data coming everywhere. But here's the thing. We can't fault teachers because they're not being trained on how to use that data day to day in the classroom. We can't fault leaders because when they take their statistic classes and things, it's not aligned to the pedagogical shifts that have to occur. So that vulnerability and honesty, and just like I talked about personalization, when we look at a school, a district, a system, their path forward is going to look different than other systems. But the key kind of glue that holds all together is the research and then what type of evidence we're going to use to kind of validate the process.
Eric, it's been awesome to spend some time with you today. Thank you very much. As we close out here, let people know where they can find you and your work.
Oh boy. Well, yeah, kind of all over the social media space. That's how, don't take this as creepy, but Scott and I met online. But, EricSheninger.com, X, Insta, Facebook, oh my goodness, LinkedIn, you name it. You just search Eric Sheninger and you will find me.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Eric. This has been great. Any final, you have the principal audience here listening in, any final words of advice or support or anything for them?
One, don't prepare students for something, prepare them for anything. We just don't know what that something is anymore. And I really emphasize the small shifts to practice, really focus on doing what we already know works better. And I think I'll end at that because, again, we don't want to overwhelm people with enough stuff on their plates.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for another episode of the NAESP Principal Podcast. We will talk to you again soon.
To explore more resources on innovative leadership, visit naesp.org and learn more about the Center for Innovative Leadership. The NAESP Principal Podcast is produced by the National Association of Elementary School Principals. Learn more about our community and membership at naesp.org. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the NAESP Principal Podcast and share it with a colleague who's helping teachers take small steps towards big change.